Do you know if you need a work visa to make a project overseas? Because I've got info for backpackers, photographers, filmmakers, friends, family, and more. To pick up where we left off last week, I was now 18 years old, I graduated from high school and film school in May of 2012, we'd pre-produced this feature film, and I felt ready to step things up that summer. But was I ready to shoot in other countries? Lesson 1. Always check international law before working in a foreign country. With the script ready, the cast and crew locked in, the itinerary set, and the backpacks and camera gear purchased, I felt as prepared as I could be. So on June 12th, 2012, we got on a flight from San Francisco to London. But here's the thing. None of us had any idea if what we were doing was actually legal, or if we were committing a crime in the 5 countries we shot in. And I don't think any of us really even considered the idea until years later. But if we were working on a film overseas, did that mean we were working overseas and needed work visas in the countries we were visiting? We weren't being paid, but we did hope to profit off of the work. But that money, if made, would come in through ATAEC Studios, an American production company. Now, we didn't get in trouble for this because even though we called ourselves a company making an international film, we weren't employees with wages and this company didn't have a tax ID. We were legally just 4 teenage friends traveling, making something with no money changing hands, and one of us was still a minor, so luckily we avoided any legal issues there. But it wasn't until I signed with a distribution company called Adler & Associates years later that I learned that we didn't need to worry about that. So the fear kind of lingered in the back of my mind every once in a while until I finally learned the details about the legality of what we'd done. However, if you or a company you work for hires and pays employees internationally, you do need to check work visa laws to make sure you're complying with international work requirements. If you're thinking to yourself, well, I'm only paying a few people, I can do this under the table, it's a small shoot, remember, it is always worse to break international law than national law. And as a foreigner in another country, you will not be treated as well as a citizen of that country. So I would urge you to be very careful and reconsider doing anything risky without double-checking the laws, especially involving stunts and explosions, because you do not want to end up in prison overseas. Actually, you do not want to end up in prison, period. Lesson 2. Work with international creatives to expand your horizons. Our plane touched down in London, England, the morning of June 13th, 2012, the first step on our own personal odyssey. And Selena met Aaron, Colin, and I at Heathrow Airport and brought us back to her flat in Greenwich. We unpacked what we needed, and after that, it was straight off to our first official meeting with someone we'd never met before, a composer by the name of Ian Arber, who worked for the British Broadcasting Channel at the time. We'd gotten in contact with him online through a talent website called Star Now, if I remember correctly. We walked from the Tube, aka the Underground for the first time, to Piccadilly Circus and Trafalgar Square, and had some time to mess around and get some shots before our meeting, including sitting on the lion statues. Then, we met Ian Arber at a coffee shop chain called Cafe Nero near Trafalgar Square. He honestly seemed to be really excited about the idea of scoring a film about a backpacking trip around Europe, something that would allow him to use different styles of music for different countries and areas. Ian Arber did end up composing the score for Carpe Diem, and he has worked on all sorts of projects since. Everything from Mission Impossible Rogue Nation to I Am Bolt to Paris Has Fallen. We were nobodies, and he took a chance with us, and I'll always be grateful for him for that. If you ever see me promoting his work or wondering how I know this European composer, that's why. And in general, I think international collaboration always looks good in your work history. It shows a willingness to work with others, a willingness to be respectful of other cultures, and it shows that your work has reached the point where it can cross borders. Personally, I think he did a fantastic job, and I've gotten nothing but great feedback from him, except from one unusual employer, but that's a different story. To continue our current story, after talking to Ian and nailing the interview in our eyes, we walked out feeling on top of the world. We were teenagers, so we were strutting around, swag walking as we called it at the time. You know, look at that swag, swiggity swoody, you know, that kind of thing. We were cloud 9. We'd made it to Europe. We had a successful meeting and we locked in our composer. We wanted to celebrate that night. And it occurred to us, we could now take advantage of the fact that drinking and therefore clubbing was 18 in England, as opposed to 21 in the US. However, not all of us were 18, which brings us to the next lesson. Don't get friendly with people in places you aren't old enough to be. Somehow, we managed to walk the streets that night until we found a guy who knew where to get 2 18-year-old guys, 1 19-year-old girl, and 1 17-year-old guy into a club.
Is this a gay bar?
Yep. You're ready for the time of your life.
It's not a gay bar. We speak the Queen's English here. You'd call it a lit cigarette.
Fine, but if I go in there and see Bubba again, I swear to God.
Now, we got in just after midnight, and we were relieved to finally be able to go inside somewhere. But I don't think we noticed that we were probably at one of the riskiest clubs in all of Greater London, specifically because they allowed minors in if they, quote-unquote, promised not to drink. Now, we didn't get in trouble for this because no incidents occurred, right? Carding in Europe is a lot less strict in the US as well, and the punishments are a lot less severe. However, I don't think we realized the implications at the time. We were at a club that let in minors. We were there until it closed for the night, and one of us was quite literally jailbait, as it's often called, and where we were makes that worse. Think about it. If you walk into a club, place that checks ID, you'd automatically assume people inside are of age. But one of us wasn't of age. And if you know anything about 21st century dancing, you know that it often involves grinding. So one of us could easily have put older adults in a seriously compromising situation without really meaning to. So this warning is for everyone. Don't get friendly with people in places you aren't old enough to be, and check to make sure people are who they say they are. But remember, as much as this could accidentally be dangerous for adults, it's way more dangerous for minors, because there are predators out there looking for places just like that, and those predators might look like us, but they're not like us. Lesson 4, be confident enough to try out a good idea. We spent that night at Selena's flat and turned floor space into bed space using inflatable camping mattresses, which meant June 14th was our first full day in London. So it felt fitting to shoot scene 5, meeting Julia first, showing all the characters interacting together for the first time. We had the great idea that shooting it on the Charing Cross Bridge, aka the Golden Jubilee Bridges, would look great. So we went there and just waited for times where there wasn't much foot traffic to shoot the dialogue. And it only took us 51 minutes. We'd had a good idea, tried it out successfully, and we're ready to eat some food. We weren't quite ready to jump into British food just yet, though, so we got some Vietnamese food to re-energize ourselves for the moment. While there, we celebrated the fact that we got a scene with famous, recognizable landmarks in the background, and no one interrupted us or asked us anything, so we figured we were off to a good start. However, it wasn't a great start, because that night, one of us went to see Les Miserables on the West End for £25. It was an incredible deal compared to the US, and he couldn't pass it up. But he left his backpack in the theater, which contained his passport, almost ending the trip before it began. How could we get to the other countries if one of us didn't have a passport anymore? We went to sleep that night, not knowing if he'd ever see his backpack or passport again. Was this film over on day 3? On the morning of June 15th, he went straight back to the theater and asked the theater staff about the lost backpack. And they let him look in the lost and found, where luckily, he managed to find the backpack. Not a single thing had been stolen from inside it, but we were shocked to think about how close we were to having to end this whole trip on day 3 out of 37. But after securing the backpack and the passport, we shot in and around Selena's flat that day because it felt like a home base, and therefore shooting within a few feet of it was the easiest possible option. We needed a place to be Julia's apartment, so why not use the actress's actual place? Once we were set up, it only took an hour and 10 minutes to shoot scene 23, Jack Goes Out. And that evening, we went out to a place called the North Pole Bar and found that we were the only ones there, just us and the bartender. And I had an idea, and I thought it would be great if it worked. So I decided it was time to be even more confident. I worked up some courage for a second and went up to the bartender, said we were Californian filmmakers, and asked if we could shoot a scene for a movie right here, and said he could be in the movie if he wanted to. And that is how we shot the ordering whiskey at the bar scene for free. and how Santosh Guni went from being a bartender to a bartender/IMDb registered actor in one night. In fact, Santosh was so excited to be part of the film that he didn't charge us for any of those drinks. Not that one, or that one, or that one. Oddly enough, I would introduce Santosh to my father years later, but I'll get to that down the road. Story time. After we'd finished filming, one of us left to go see Wicked on the West End. Again, taking advantage of those deals compared to US theater prices. And the rest of us ate at the North Pole Bar, finally sinking our teeth into some real British food. We each had a steak and ale pie with chips, or fries, and a small salad, and we were actually impressed. We'd been hesitant to try British food prior to that, but we enjoyed it. However, our theater lover had another incident that night. He left the West End and headed back to Greenwich after the show ended, but he had to fill up his Oyster card, which is the tap-to-pay card or refillable card that the public transit system in London uses. So he went to a window teller and added money to the card so he could take the tube back. And then he walked to the entrance to the tube and reached into his pocket to use the Oyster card he had just added money to, and found that not only was the Oyster card missing, his whole wallet was missing. The same man who'd forgotten his backpack at the theater the night before had now left his wallet on the counter of a public transit station. He sprinted back through the underground tunnel to where he'd filled up the card and found his wallet still sitting on the counter. But the number of potential catastrophes we avoided those first few days was astounding, which is also how we learned lesson 5. Do not pull the emergency lever on trains unless you are prepared to deal with some serious consequences. Our second location was Scotland, mainly Edinburgh and Loch Ness, and it's quite a trip to get up to Loch Ness. So our first step was getting from London to Lake District National Park via train. And to do that, we had to wake up at 5:30 a.m. on June 16th. We rushed to the train station and got on the train with only 2 minutes to spare, and arrived in a hamlet called Oxenholme at 11:30. Apparently, a hamlet is a village too small to have a church, but most hamlets would also be too small to have a train station, so it's kind of an in-between. Now, in the script, Daniel goes missing on the way to Loch Ness, allowing Aaron Shee to be the camera operator for the other three of us, and me to be the camera operator for his scenes. But there was actually a moment when we were getting off that train in Oxenholme when one of us was just a few seconds slower to pack up his things than the rest of us. And as he moved to the entryway, the door closed before he could get off the train. He panicked as the train started to move. He looked around, and not knowing what to do, he pulled the emergency lever, which activates the emergency brakes. The train loudly screeched to a halt in a motion that did not look natural. We were worried if the train was damaged. Every single door on the train opened at once, and an angry voice on the other side of the speaker yelled out, "Why did you pull the lever?" He explained he'd panicked because the door had closed and locked with him on the wrong side. He was stuck on the train. And then a staff member from the train showed up. Now, the only reason he didn't get in trouble for this was because the staff member understood what had happened and physically pushed him off the train down onto the platform and released the emergency brake so that he wouldn't get caught. Because I think the staff member knew he didn't know the consequences of what he'd just done. However, if you pull that emergency lever on a train, the fine is very expensive. In the UK at the time, it was equivalent to just over $1,000. Keep in mind, this entire trip cost around $2,000 per person, so it would be like paying for an extra 2.5 weeks of traveling in Europe without getting one extra day. There's also a very real chance that he might have made hundreds of people late for work that day, depending on their commute. Public transit laws are very similar in many countries in Europe, Asia, and the Americas. So don't pull the lever. Kronk. On top of that, we never found the Lake District National Park campsite where we were meant to sleep that night. Because it turns out that Oxenholme, that large hamlet that started to merge with the village of Kendal, is actually over 6 miles away from Lake District National Park. It's the closest train station, but it's still quite a distance when carrying, at least for me, over 1/3 of my body weight and gear on my back. We spent about 5 hours walking through the rain trying to find a place to stay the night. We had to stop at a gas station for food and tried a flaky pastry called Cornish pasties for the first time, which weren't bad, but kept us going. We even asked farmers if we could camp on land they weren't growing on at the moment, and they said no. We hung out under a bridge, feeling a little homeless, just trying to get out of the rain, and we ate Ritz crackers while we talked through our options. We ended up camping in a small park in Kendall, under a large tree, and crashing there for the night. It rained all night too, so our first night camping was not our easiest at all. Peeing outdoors in the cold rain isn't ideal for anyone, but especially not for women, so I knew this was pushing the cast and crew pretty hard from the get-go. We woke up that next morning, June 17th, and the tents were soaked. But luckily our backpacks inside were still dry. We packed up the tents to make it look like we hadn't been camping as soon as possible because we doubted we were allowed to camp where we had and wanted to be gone before anyone found us and kicked us out. We stopped at what Selena called a leisure center that morning to pee and buy snacks. It ended up being our breakfast. And then we returned to the Oxenholme train station. We managed to shoot scene 8, Goodbye to London, outside of that train station early that morning while waiting for the train station to open up, which was perfect because it was quiet, there was no one else around waiting, and no one working to tell us if we could or couldn't shoot there. So we got the scene done, and we got on our train when it arrived at 10:30 a.m., and that wrapped up our time in England, both in the film and in real life. So you'll have to tune in next week to find out what we experienced in the wild lands of Loch Ness.
Hello. Is this a sex line?
Why, yes, I am looking for a good time.
Jack? Daniel?